Thank you very much for the invitation. Really happy to be here today for two reasons. It's my first time being here, and it's really great to have such a intellectual group of people to talk to. The other thing is I had a bad dream this morning that it was 5:30 p.m. and I was not here. So I was driving in the dream with a friend, and it was rainy, and I was like, oh my God, what am I going to say? It's 5:30. I should have been there by 3:30. And then I woke up, so you know the feeling. You know, these feelings that you get when you have an exam or something and you missed it. So that's the second reason why I'm happy to be here, because it was just a dream, thank God. Actually, I gave the similar talk about this a couple of weeks ago, but it was mainly about politics, conspiracy theory in politics. But as we know, politics and religion, actually they intertwine, they affect each other. And in the Arab slash, why I put Arab slash Muslim, because I'm going to refer to some of the political events also to as an example of the mentality of having one model to explain everything, whether it's political, historic, or religious. And we'll see the relationship to what Wissam has just said about Islamic reform and how is that impacted by actually subscribing to this school of thinking. Conspiracy theory as the main or the most used model to explain things in history, politics, and religion. Let me start first by saying that conspiracy theory is not a unique Muslim or Arab thing. It is an international phenomenon. A lot of societies here in the US, I've talked to a lot of people, intellectual people actually, in universities and in meetings, and those people were smart, have academic degrees, and they subscribe to conspiracy theory in explaining events of history, politics, or using the term that we will refer to in this presentation, the undefined they. They are doing this, they want that. So it is a phenomenon around the world. It's a school of thinking. People subscribe to it, yeah. But why is it more damaging to societies in the Middle East or in the Muslim world? Why it is not as damaging in the US, for instance, or in Europe, more than it is in the Middle East? Why is it more of an issue there than we have here? We'll go one step at a time and we'll see why. Now, if you go and look for a definition of the conspiracy theory, you'll have several definitions. You have a definition here, Britannica, that talks about an attempt to explain harmful or tragic events as the result of the actions of a small, powerful group. Another one by Webster, the Webster Dictionary, which I tend to like it more, which is simply it's a theory that explains an event or set of circumstances as the result of a secret plot by usually powerful conspirators. Now, whether it's a small or big, whether it's a government or just influential people, it's this short definition is mostly what people think of when we talk about conspiracy. The other thing is when we talk about conspiracy theory, we're not talking about something that is necessarily logical. We're talking about a belief. It's not an ideology that you discuss. It's not Marxism. It's not an ideology. It is a belief. You believe first that things don't look the way they are. There is always a hidden cause or a hidden conspirator behind things, and then you start to address things. So it is a belief. That's why it's not a 1+1 discussion when you talk to people who believe in conspiracy theories. You have to be aware that they believe in that first, and then start presenting your logical arguments. Because unless you defeat them 100% by scientific or by logical evidence, the belief is always there. Okay. Now, where does that come from? Well, if you go to the biblical Quranic story of how we all started, it's a conspiracy by, let's say, allowed by God, a conspiracy by Satan to seduce Adam and Eve to eat the apple, and then we're all here. We're supposed to be in heaven, but we're all here right now. So the root of conspiracy in the thinking of some societies goes back to this first beginning of life. It was a conspiracy by Satan to take out Adam and Eve out of heaven, and to defy God, to show God that I can defy your powers, and it happened. Now, throughout history, we have other conspiracies or other conspiracy theories that have been adopted to describe or to interpret historic events. I'm focusing more here because of the nature of our talk on Islam. Now I'm going to talk about two main conspiracy theories, for one from the Sunni side and one from the Shia side. Now, I hope you can read this book talks about a famous figure, mostly considered as a fictitious figure by scholars, but a lot of people still believe in this person. This person is called Ibn Saba. He was considered the reason or the cause or the instigator of the events that happened at the time of the third caliph, when there was a revolution and the rebels came into Medina and they killed the third caliph, and they instated the fourth caliph, who's the cousin of the Prophet, Imam Ali. And because of the war that happened after that between the wife of the Prophet, along with some of his companions, against Imam Ali, the fourth caliph, some of the scholars, let's say historians, they could not actually justify the discrepancy between calling all the companions of the Prophet as people of justice, people of high morality, and the fact that they actually had a war and they killed each other. So they resorted to the idea of conspiracy theory by this man who's called Ibn Saba. This guy was from Yemen. His mother was a black Jewish woman. And as you can see, I tried to translate the title of this book. Now, this is called the number one on top here. It says, "The Invisible Government of the World." Now, that gives you the idea of where we're coming from. And then the name of the guy. Sorry?
There are 15 books before that?
Oh, yeah. Because the Invisible Government has a lot of projects. It's a series of... Then it says Ibn Saba, the name of the guy, and then it says he's the founder of the Freemasons in Islam. Now, they're going backward because, Freemasons, the Freemasons were way after Ibn Saba. But anyway, or the son of the black woman, Ibn as-Sawda. And then it says here, the first who started crises and war in Islam. The first one who started all these feuds and antagonism in Islam. We lost it?
I don't know.
I still have it here.
Conspiracy.
Conspiracy,
Yeah.
Oh my God.
See, they're powerful.
Wait.
They're powerful.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah.
Oh, it's back here.
You have to pick a different topic then.
Whenever I talk, something happens. Yeah, it's a conspiracy. Now, from the Shia side, there is the Sunni conspiracy against reinstating or sort of declaring Imam Ali as the successor of the Prophet. Now, if you guys know, there is a famous incident especially celebrated in the Shia literature, about it's called the Ghadir Khum, which was an incident when the Prophet wanted to show his support to Imam Ali because he was a judge in Yemen and some people were complaining about his harsh decisions. So he simply said, I support him, and the Shias took this as an evidence of him being the successor of the Prophet. As you can see in this picture, supposedly these are the Muslims coming back from Mecca to Medina with the Prophet, and they're responding to the Prophet declaring his support to Ali. And you have 3 people here standing on the side. Those 3 people, according to Shia literature, they are the first caliph, the second caliph, and the third one, who's supposed to be the source, who the books were depending on him and saying that they were whispering to each other, once he dies, everything will be done. We will take over. We will, for now, let's just say yes, but once he's dead, we'll, Ali will not be the caliph. And this is actually what happened. But in a different story. I mean, it was not actually the same conspiracy, but later on, centuries later, people were writing that this is a conspiracy. They said this. They even say that one of them whispered to the other without saying who heard this whisper, 700 years later. Now, does that mean we don't have conspiracies in our lives? Well, number one, married people know that there is always a conspiracy by the mother, right? Mothers-in-law. And I think I don't have documentation, so I said in the presentation that if we have married people in the audience, they would maybe testify to this. Yeah, they would know that, mothers-in-law, daughters-in-law. I mean, we have a lot of cases of conspiracies against each other. Now, do we actually have conspiracies? The answer is simply yes, we do. I mean, we're not eliminating this idea at all 100%. I mean, what you see here simply is a declassified document from the CIA that talks about reinstating the Shah back in 1954 and overthrowing the socialist prime minister at that time who nationalized oil companies. So it was an operation. Now the CIA acknowledges, I mean, we knew that all the time, but now they acknowledge fully that, yes, we did that back in the 50s. They gave money. They supported rallies against him, and things happen. So what governments call covert operations, we call them conspiracies. It's a bit of a stretch because people talk about conspiracy as the logic behind everything in history, but if we understand what falls under conspiracy in the minds of people, then this is one of the things that they talk about as a conspiracy. Now, there is also the Protocol of Sevres in 1956, which is basically when the 3 countries, Israel, Britain, and France, they had a secret meeting and they agreed to have a scenario of attacking Egypt, and then the Brits and the French would come in as saviors of the Suez Canal, and that would help them in breaking the decision of nationalizing the Canal Suez. I mean, this is one example also of conspiracies, which is considered legitimate in the world of politics. I mean, in politics, you do whatever it is necessary for you to do to protect your own national interests. And at that time, it was the national interest of France, Britain, and the national interest of the US to overthrow this obnoxious prime minister. Now, why do people resort to this interpretation of events or interpretation of history or religion or politics? One American historian gave us one reason, which you can see. The first one is the inability to channel political interests into representative groups. And that also could apply to minority groups in Islam. You can see that, for instance, the Shias, when they were oppressed under the Umayyad state, they resorted to this conspiracy theory of the majority because they could not have their voice heard, they could not channel their political interest, they were not represented in political system at that time. So they resorted to this, and this applies also to other minorities in the state at that time. Now, in the third world, or especially in the Middle East, we don't have training in schools and in society on critical thinking. As we heard stories before, the story from Tunisia, and it applies to all the Arab countries, you listen in school and you memorize and you write down what the teacher tells you. And the exam, you are excellent, you get an A if you write exactly what he told you in the classroom. If you deviate in any way, then you will lose points, and at the same time you will be rejected by society. The other thing here is lack or distortion of information. Now, we don't have documentation in the Arab world, let's say, of our political history, and even if we have, it's not open to public. You cannot go to Egypt, for instance, and ask for the documents of the 1967 war or 1956, although it's been 60 years. You simply cannot do that. Even if you're a scholar, they will question you for a long time, and then most likely you will be denied access. Not just Egypt, most of the Arab countries. As we said also, conspiracy theory existed in interpretations of several religious and historic events. Like we just talked about the Sunni Shia, we also talked about we also have, for instance, the protocol of the protocols that are attributed to the Zionist wise people who had a meeting supposedly early in the 20th century. And we all know that it's fabricated. Everyone knows it's fabricated, but it's still one of the most widely sold books in the Arab world, because it also subscribes to the idea that most of the problems that we have in the around the world right now is made by Jews, by Zionists, and they even say that the Arab Spring itself was orchestrated by those people. How, I don't know. I mean, how the CIA recruited al-Bouazizi to burn himself, that's still something to be discovered. There is also the convenience of having one model in your mind. When you're faced with complicated historic or political or religious topics, like for instance, the war between the companions of the Prophet, they're all pure Muslims, they're all believers. And yet, after the death of the Prophet, a few years later, they fought each other, they killed each other. So how do you fit this in your mind? Unless you have a model, one model that is simple, easy for you, whenever you're confronted with such events, you'll simply put this model and it solves everything. It's just like a magic software that solves everything for you. The other thing is, nowadays, dictatorships in the Middle East especially find this issue of interpreting all events using this model of conspiracy theory is very convenient for them, because number one, you're diverting the public from the actual cause of the problem, which could be no democracy, bad policies, whether it's economic or social or political, and you're simply directing them to an exterior enemy, which always works. It always works. You're being threatened by people who want to change the way of your lives. You are threatened by people who are attacking your religion, your beliefs. So people always turn their back to the dictator of that country, and they accuse, whether it's the West or the U.S. or Israel or the international invisible government of the world, whoever this party is, and they throw the blame on them, and the dictator is sitting there happy with the result. Okay? Now, we have characteristics of conspiracy theory explanation that we can talk about in just a few points. Like, number one, it's simplification of analysis. It's someone is trying to harm us, someone is trying to attack us, bad people are targeting us. This is the main point of a conspiracy theory. And then you always hear the term them or they, okay? It's a conspiracy by them. And who is them? God knows. I mean, they do that. They want to do that. And then we continue with the unknown pronoun. Lack of verified evidence. When we talk about conspiracy theory, we don't actually, as we said before, it's a belief more than it is something that is factual, something that can be proved. And the third point is the poor understanding of historic, social, economic, and political factors that contribute to certain events in a complicated way. Now, when you talk about the revolution in 1917 in Russia, when you talk about the Arab Spring, when you talk about complicated events in the world, you cannot simply just, if you don't have understanding of the social, the economic, the historic factors that actually helped create this event or this historic movement, then you simply resort to it's a conspiracy by them. And the last point is the world is divided into good and bad. And the bad people are always conspiring, and the bad people are always strong, by the way. They're strong, and they're always conspiring against the good people. Now, let's go briefly to the point that we talked about in the beginning of our talk. Why is it more damaging to the Muslim communities? Why is the conspiracy theory? We have it here in the US, by the way. And about 15 to 20% of people who were asked about the 9/11 events in the US still think that it is an inside job. And for a percentage like this in the US, that's a lot. But if you go to the Middle East, like in a country like Lebanon, for instance, the percentage was 65. In Egypt, it was almost 80%.
Because we're smarter.
Yeah, because you guys are smarter. Okay, why is it more damaging? Number one, it helps cover the religious, social, and political problems that we have in the Middle East, which we don't actually discuss openly and frankly through whether research centers or in the media. We don't really discuss our problems that openly, the way we do it here in the West. And once you resort to conspiracy theory, I mean, you limit the discussion of the actual problems that are causing these issues in your country, and you're simply closing the door by saying it's a conspiracy by others, so we don't need to discuss any problems that we have. Number two is lack of free flow of information, which will deepen that conviction of the conspiracy theory. As I just said, I mean, here in the U.S. you have the FOIA, for instance. Right, you can go to the CIA archives, the FBI archives. You can go to the Library of Congress. I mean, the flow of information in the U.S. is way more open and transparent than we have it back there in the Middle East. Actually, the sad fact is that most of what I know about the history of the Middle East comes from reading British books, British and French books, because they were colonizing us, thank God, at some point. So we know the history. It helps to further deepen the existing feeling of defeat. Now, we already have a feeling of defeat, whether it's militarily or scientifically or historically. On all levels, there is a hidden feeling of defeat in the Arab world or in the Muslim world. We're behind. We're not as progressing as the other countries are. So it helps also deepen that feeling that you are defeated. It enhances paranoia to the point of questioning science. Now, if you go online and see how many people are questioning the evolution or the Big Bang Theory and considering them as also part of the conspiracy theory or simply just hoax, you'll be shocked. Now, the deep feeling in all the people who believe, or societies that believe in conspiracy theory, is simply we are helpless. The good guys and the bad guys, and someone is manipulating the world. Someone is with extremely undefeated powers will be able to conspire on us all the time, although we know what he's doing, but we are helpless. We cannot do anything about that. Now, examples of the conspiracy theory in the Arab world. For instance, the invasion of Kuwait in 1990. It says that the popular theory now is that the U.S. gave a green light through this meeting between Saddam and the American ambassador at that time. No one actually have the time to go and read the minutes of the meeting, which suggests nothing of that at all. There was no green light whatsoever. But if you go and ask Arabs, I would say something like 8 out of 10 would say to you it is an American conspiracy against us. And later on, as you guys know, in 1991, Saddam used the Islamic card and he declared jihad, and he was trying to use Islam against the US. So again, we're using religion with conspiracy theory. 9/11, we just talked about this. And as I said, about 65 to 80% think it's an inside job. Some people here in the US also think it's an inside job. No evidence whatsoever has been provided at all that it was an inside job, that there were explosions put or bombs were put by the US government in the towers, which is totally not true. I mean, and if it's an inside job, you will have at least how many? 1,000 people to know about it? Because if the government is plotting, how many people do you have to tell in order for them to execute that? And the other thing is, the other interpretation, which is sort of a mild conspiracy theory, it says, no, the government did not do it, but it allowed the terrorists to do it in order to have a cause for its war on terror, which is, again, cannot be verified at all. Now, war on Islam. This is one of the very popular conspiracy theories. And as you can see, this is one of the flyers that you can see online by people saying or claiming that ISIS is completely manufactured, built, funded by, as you can see, ISIS did not come out of nowhere. It was seeded, cultivated, and fertilized by the West, GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, the Arab countries like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, and Israel. You see the interesting, intriguing combination of all these countries, which basically, I mean, this idea basically blocks any attempt to do any kind of reform, the one that Wissam talked about. Because once you say that ISIS is a Western-made, manufactured, then we don't need to go back and talk about the literature that they depend on. We don't need to go back and look at what Ibn Taymiyyah said, what the fatwas that actually they depend on in their jihad, the fiqh al-raqiq, fiqh al-jihad, and all of that. We were not going to question anything. It's a Western plot against us. That's it. Case closed. Okay? Now, how do we deal with them? How do we counter the argument of conspiracy theory? Number one, we should acknowledge that we do have conspiracies in our world. I mean, it happens. Whether you call it a covert operation of the CIA or call it whatever you want to call it, but unless you have an evidence of that, let's not jump to conclusions. So when we tackle this topic, we should not eliminate this factor at all, but we should acknowledge it, but acknowledge it based on facts. Number one, the spread of facts. I mean, once you talk about theories and conspiracy theories, once you face these theories with facts, like the 9/11, for instance, I read a couple of books written by reporters plus engineers who actually explained all the details of how the towers fell and why, and responded to all these questions. Once you put the facts online, this will help a lot in the argument. Again, we said it's a faith. It's not a logical thing, but it helps to go to a certain distance in countering the conspiracy theory argument. And the use of social media actually is very powerful. Translation of facts and books and articles that talk about the factual basis of arguing against the conspiracy theory will help a lot in countering this. And something that we here don't have power on, it inshallah it will happen in the future, which is to encourage critical thinking in schools, universities in the Middle East, which will help people to question what they read and question the conventional beliefs, whether it's religious, political, social, or whatever they are. Now, I think I'm done with time. Okay? Thank you.